IGDA Albany chapter. Professional talk. Modular sound design is flexible sound design, given by Concha, a local audio designer from Vicarious Visions. Yay!
Yay,
Thanks,
that's me.
Joe.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So we'll let you get started.
All right. So, as you mentioned, I am a sound designer, a technical sound designer at Vicarious Visions. I've been doing sound-related something or other for about 12 years now. A lot of theater stuff, some advertising, so kind of linear film media things. And my real passion has always been games, and this talk contains some elements of stuff that I've taught in the past, as well as just kind of a glimpse into how my brain works, which is a dangerous, scary place, but is also the right ingredients to do technical audio. So I did mention in the description of this that no technical know-how is required. That's true. I'm not going to get into the weeds with all this sort of thing. But hopefully this gives people kind of a new way of looking at things and thinking about approaching kind of sound design, but other disciplines and things as well. So I do want to start with the couple of disclaimers I got to give. Well, I gave the overview just now. Like I said, we're going to do some examples of this stuff, and I'll define kind of how I'm using modularity, because any actual engineers or programmers listening to this will just laugh and say, that's not what modularity is, crazy sound person. But I'll share a couple of tips and tricks and things for how I kind of approach problems with this state of mind. The disclaimers, now that I'm up to the right slide, I do want to disclose that yes, I'm at Vicarious Visions. That is part of Activision Blizzard King. And of course, that means the viewpoints and opinions expressed in the presentation are entirely my own and do not reflect or represent those of Vicarious Visions or Activision Blizzard King. My views are my own. So now they're off the hook for all the dumb stuff I'm about to tell you. So let's dive into what I'm talking about when I say modularity. You know, this is this magical ingredient that I've left this vague title out there that's going to make everything better. So in context, I'm using modularity to describe how modular or different elements of a system or a approach or a solution are, meaning they can be independent of other things that are also in that same kind of box, that same project, that same environment. We want to have the ability to keep these things separate and lean and efficient, and the degree to which they are is modularity. Nobody has ever looked at, say, a power button and been confused. I say, oh yeah, you push that button and it turns it on or off. That's crystal clear to anybody because it's a very modular system. That little button, if you hit it, it either turns it on, or if it's already on, you hit it, it turns it off. So that's the most basic representation of kind of the idea that I'm stressing. We don't know what it turns on or off. We don't know if you have to hold it down for a second, but the button is going to do that thing. And as we're going to see in some of the examples that I'm going to show, you can look at everything as some scale of module, as some functional tool that does a thing, right? That's the further you can compartmentalize these things down and break them down, the easier it gets to understand, right? That's, a very simple module like a power button. No one ever gets confused. A power button can be put on everything. We don't know what it does. All three of those things allow us to take that power button example and use it for a different purpose. When I teach anything, I like to hammer home the point because that's what it takes for me to learn things. So I apologize if I am repeating myself a lot. Usually it takes 3 or 4 times of me hearing something to think, oh, I should probably listen to that. So if everybody gets to the point where they're yelling, yes, we know, I'll try to skip forward. But until that happens, let's let's hope that someone else is benefiting from that beat 'em over the head approach with it. So let's dive right in with examples of modularity in sound so that we have a more contextual outline of what we're looking at and why this is important. The perfect example for sound folks is the DAW, or the Digital Audio Workspace. That is quintessential modular breakouts of everything you're going to need. The project you open up has lots of little tracks. Each of those little tracks can have all sorts of audio on them, but it doesn't know if you're making game audio, if you're making audio for radio dramas. It has no idea. That abstraction of what the actual purpose is means that it's more flexible in the long run. This track could have stereo files on it. This track could have mono files on it. This track could have bass drops. This track could have footsteps. Whatever you want, it's incredibly flexible. But the idea that's important is a track is this horizontal line that you can put audio in. It's this kind of, if you squint, that's what you see, right? You don't know what's there. You don't know if it's turned up or down, but that's a thing tracks can do. They can turn volume up or down. They can pan left or right. They can have effects on them, but those effects are contained. That effect, if it's an equalizer, is its own little contained thing. It doesn't know what it's EQing. Thinking in terms of these little bite-sized pieces makes each of these things very easy to digest and allows us to talk about that thing. I could do a whole talk on just compressors if we wanted to, and the various uses for them, but it wouldn't matter what DAW we were in. I use Reaper, but the rules all apply to everything else as well. Everything has this kind of breakout of things that are easy to look at, and that all comes from tape systems from before that had very limited number of tracks. You know, you might have 2 tracks you can put down on this tape, or then 4 track, or then the 8 track, and that was the limiting factor. But again, whatever was on that one track, that was its own little module, and you'd have 8 of those modules all doing the same thing with different results to work together. If we think about music the same way, we have any number of arrangements of a song. We have songs with no lyrics that are the instrumental version, the karaoke version. We have hugely varied versions of songs that everybody knows. If you look at something like an All Along the Watchtower, it starts out with this very iconic bass line into this very iconic guitar riff, unless, of course, it's the Bear McCreary version from Battlestar Galactica, which has none of those things and starts out with this kind of South Asian ambient thing going on. So it's amazing how you can take these different modules out of these different things and create the same idea or a different idea, all with the same ingredients. So in the idea of music, you have high frequency versus low frequency, rhythmic versus melodic, with the leading part versus the background parts, the supporting parts, harmonies, all of that sort of thing. However you want to break these pieces out, writing a song gets a lot easier if you say, okay, I'm going to write the bass line. I'm a bass player. I know bass. I'm going to write this bass line. Cool. You can do that because you've broken this modular, this whole thing down into its little module of what does the bass sound like. You might be a really hard composer, right? You care about the music theory in the situation. So now you might look at this as, how am I going to write this chord progression? I know these chords in this mode, in this order, are going to have this effect and convey this kind of emotional feeling and vibe. So maybe you start out with structuring things like that. But again, you're thinking about these blocks of, this section is this chord progression or this feel, and then this block is this feel, and each module has its own kind of purpose. So hopefully that starts to give kind of a context in sound land of how many different things are contributing to a whole picture? How many different modules in the case of this talk? A great example is if you make a linear video, right? You're going to go through and do an ambience pass. You're going to go through and add the big beats. You're going to add debris around those beats. You're going to add Foley for the characters. You might have to record some dialogue or record some ADR if it was a location shoot, that sort of thing. Even task breakouts like that can be thought of as these kind of broad stroke modules, or these moments in time. I like to work backwards in design tests and linear media, just because it takes out the whole picture and makes me think of, oh, the last beat of the event, the video is this thing. The last beat of this cinematic event is this thing. I can take that little slice, that little module, and work there, and that'll start to inform other things. You'll keep hearing me mention abstraction. Again, in this case, that just means we don't know what the sound effects we're using are, or what this final video is in the example I just gave. We just know that I've got a video, I'm going to make the following elements to it. I'm going to end up with this really great product at the end, this really great experience for an audience member. So that's the idea of taking out that input and just assuming that it's correct. That abstraction of input means I can bring anything to the table. I could make it all with fart sounds if I want. It may not be as compelling or emotional as we might have hoped, but it'll be funny for 2 seconds and then it'll peter out. But that doesn't matter. That is before I make this plan of attack. So, if we look at some examples in game design, it might be a little more accessible to everybody, since games is why we're here. A deck of cards is incredibly simple. So if we look at the module of we have a deck of cards, what can we do with it? Well, if I'm alone, I can play solitaire, play free cell. I can make up a game. Really, the components that are needed, the modules that are needed, are a player and a deck of cards and some way to play the game. You add another player, and now you've got a totally different set of games. Add 2 more, another set of games. That module can be changed in what it does and what purpose it serves. It doesn't matter. The deck of cards is the same. The rules might change, but that could even still be whoever has the highest card wins, right? We shuffle the cards, we deal it out to 100 people. Well, 56 people. But you deal it out to as many people as you can. The person with the high card wins. Maybe spades are high. Who knows? Not much of a game, not much interaction. But we still can break this out into, well, how many players do we have? What kind of deck of cards do we have? Maybe we only have half a deck. It's, been lost over the years. We're missing an ace or something. And what rules do we make for that? Rules, again, is deliberately vague because we just need to know that the rules have the things we need to play a game. Things like, how do you win? How do you lose? What cards are good? What cards are bad? When do we get to see the cards? Cards themselves as a module are very simple. It has a suit, it has a value, and it can be face up or face down. You might have a bunch of them in a stack. You might have them all laying on the ground face down. That becomes more of a go fish or pickup game. It's whatever you want it to be, which is why if we just put it in this little black box, this little closed module of the rules are going to be a thing. We can deal with that later. We know we need a deck of cards and 2 people who want to play. You can focus on those things, or maybe I hang out with 2 other friends. We have 3 people that want to play. Well, let's start out with, we know we have 3 people. We know we have a deck of cards. Let's see if we can't figure out something to do with it. So, in game design that is a little more complicated, you start to see all these different systems. The cards could play back. We could have randomization. These could be, Magic the Gathering cards or something like that. Lots of different rules and modules come into play. Resource efficiency. Maybe these cards are my health. Maybe these cards have values on them that add up and I have to keep it above a certain number. Breaking down the rules in that substate becomes even more modules. So that's, again, back to this whole central point of let's subdivide these things into simple, easy to solve problems. Even at the bottom of the slide, you can see I've broken it out into kind of the 3 big things you need to play any card game. But going a step further, I mentioned this could be modularity for the soul too, because this is just how my brain looks at things, is modularity in our own lives. We keep breaking these things down into little modules. It could sound a little obsessive, a little compulsive, but we can take these things and solve one problem at a time. And it makes a lot of very large problems into very minor problems. And most of life is a big piling up of small problems like that. If we can't break them up, that too can be indicative of what these problems are. Maybe I have been trying to cut back on drinking, but I like being around people and that's how we hang out. We drink. Maybe the people are a bad influence. Maybe we're not doing what I really want to be doing, which is, playing flag football or something. It could be anything, but if I can't separate that drinking from hanging out with those people, I say, well, I don't really want to drink, but I still like these people. Maybe that's a problem. Maybe that helps because I can't make those 2 modules, the hanging out and the drinking, separate things. They're too intertwined. They're too dependent on each other. Not to say that modules don't have cross-dependency, but that example is a great way to kind of focus in on, okay, maybe that's the problem. Maybe I do really like drinking. I just need to cut back and they drink way too much. Analyzing why I can't pull these 2 things apart is really, really useful for identifying what other problems might be there. The example I give in the slide, exercising. People are really good about making it to things they want to make it to, getting to appointments that are going to cost them money or they've agreed to do. It's hard to miss a doctor's appointment because you usually don't feel well and it's going to make you feel better. We can tell ourselves exactly that for exercise as well, but I'm tired, I don't want to go to the gym today. Or I only have a half hour, I don't want to start a workout, I don't want to get changed, whatever. Is that, a problem with your own scheduling? Is that module leaning too much into other things? Have you not made space for it? Have you not blocked out this time? It's a very abstract way of looking at this thing, but to me, all of life is kind of these individual things. My block of exercise, regardless of what exercises I do, if it's leg day, upper body day, what have you, whether I drink a protein shake or not, that workout module is this thing that I can move around, and whatever I put into it, I will get some variation out of it. So, hopefully, that kind of whirlwind of examples isn't too meandery. I assume if everybody stays muted and no one's chiming in with, I'm totally lost, we're okay. If anybody is totally lost, hopefully some of the modularity examples that I'm going to show now in practice will clarify that. Because really this is a state of mind. I could go on and on all day because this is just how my brain works. And I don't expect anybody to go, oh, wow, I see the whole world differently now. I see everything in tiny little matrix code blocks, That's not the point of this. But if you've been really worried about how am I going to ever make this card game I've wanted to make? How am I ever going to write this report I've been needing to write or this short story I want to write? How am I ever going to figure out how to put my schedule into the right place so I get all the chores I need to do done and run all the errands I need to run and still have time to play the video game I want to play? hopefully you can start to break some of these things down and figure out with some reflection where these individual schedule and foundational bits of your brain and your state of mind may be breaking, or maybe dependent on, oh, I can't possibly write unless I've had a drink, you know. Breaking down these problems is just making them modular. If we look at this from the opposite end, this can also inform how we make a plan from the very beginning. So if I know in the long run that I am going to write a rock song, a pop rock song, I pretty much know I'm going to need, chorus, verse, bridge, what have you. Whatever structure I want it to be, that makes it a little easier to say, okay, I need to write a catchy hook for this chorus. Now I can focus on that one thing. But if I'm doing that for a video game, maybe I need two different choruses, one for when the player is winning and one for when they're losing. We'll get into that in a little bit, but that foresight allows you to kind of plan based on the modules you know are coming. And that's why we don't want to think about what the game is right now. I don't know what game it is. Maybe it is a deck of cards. But I know the player can be winning or losing, and therefore I know, because this module says, hey, you're winning or losing, I'm going to use that to inform something else. So, by thinking about this, we can plan ahead. We can also see what other people might be doing. The example I want to give that I think is easiest to follow for everybody in actual detail here is going to be footfalls. So characters that can walk around in a video game. Everybody in the production pipeline for games has a hand in this, and it is easy to bump into each other, and it's easy to have work get created by someone upstream. I mean, audio gets to deal with this all the time. Oh, hey, we added an explosion 20 minutes from ship. Well, now it gets to be a quiet explosion. In this case, animators like to slip 1 frame or 2 frames out of an animation, and it becomes a problem. So, if we talk about animations or levels in that way, we can look at ways that they are really actually very modular, but those modules have huge ripple effects on what's going on. So the more isolated they can be and the more digestible they can be for different disciplines, the easier it is to kind of foresee what effects will be had. So an animation, makes a character move around. Characters have different skins or artistic rendering on them. They're different shapes and sizes. They have technical elements that make them move. Again, these are all modules that I don't particularly know much about or care about as a sound designer, but understanding that that module exists, this rig is going to make things move, is makes me look like this savant, Oh, wow, like he's an audio guy that knows what we do. An animator is going to appreciate that every single time. Just like I appreciate it every single time an animator knows what I do. And that's how you get this kind of communication starting and collaboration resulting from something like that. For those that don't know, typically these rigs have lots of little different animations, a run, an attack, a reaction to being hit, that sort of thing. And sound folks will use the engine to put in tags or keyframes, basically, that have information about a thing happening there, usually related to Foley effects, like clothing rustles or footsteps when the foot strikes the ground as the character is moving around. Even that, in principle, gives you 2 main options, right? Out of the gate, I could say, okay, well, this is a run cycle of a character taking 4 steps as they jog and breathing heavily, and they've got a cloak rustling around. That animation is this little tiny video. I could do that exactly the same way I do a commercial, right? It's 1 line. I know what that thing is going to look like, I could make one long sound effect that syncs up perfectly for it. And that's been done a lot of times in the history of games and in sound design, and it's worked. But the more modular approach is to tag every little element. Here is a clothing rustle. Here is another clothing rustle. Here are 4 individual footsteps. Here's where I see their chest move and they exhale. So this is, kind of a running huff and puff, and I'll put 2 of those in there. That modular approach is a little more work up front, but now I have a whole lot of different things to consider that allow me to have a lot more control over that. The idea of having everything in one take, in one single file, means I have to deal with, if that animation changes, everything is now wrong. Oh, they took out 1 step. All of that has to be moved in the sound file. If the cloak is taken out, I have to redo that whole sound file. And that can be time consuming, especially if you've done one of those for 100 different animations. That's a lot of sound design and a lot of real estate, especially if it's 30 different runs, 30 different walks at different angles. That's a ton of extra disk space. Plus, maybe I have 3 or 4 different cloak variations. Now that one animation is going to sound different every time it plays, just because the cloak moves in a different way. So, hello and welcome. So as that cloak moves in different ways, we can get, a little more variety because of that modularity. The levels example I have here is based on a true story that I will squint and blur out the details on. Levels are comprised of lots of different pieces, but they all kind of fall into, again, their own modules. This is a puzzle section. This is, a battle. If these modules don't exist, if the level itself is the module and everything's dependent on each other, you get unique events like everybody's own interpretation of what a boss fight means. So you have 10 levels. Every level has a boss in it. Each designer does their boss fight differently, and now trying to say, hey, all of them need to have a name slate that comes across the screen, Borderlands style, and says, boss number 2, he'll beat you up. If you need to add that to everybody's and only 3 of them are equipped to handle that, well, that lack of modularity means you're stuck. Do you not do it? Do you make 7 designers change their levels? It's a huge time sink, and it could have been solved by saying, hey, when you start a boss fight, everybody starts with this module. You show up, we have an intro moment, you fight the boss, we have an outro moment, whether you won or lost. If that's in place, you may never use that intro moment. Maybe that's just enough to play the animation of the boss poofing in and the cool VFX of them appearing, and then you fight them. That might be all that it is, but that beat, which designers love having these events to trigger these things, that beat exists now. So it's a lot easier to say, okay, cool, I can use that idea, that concept, which is, again, what these modules really are, that concept of a boss intro phase, and add a music change, add a cool splash screen, or pause the game and warn the player, hey, you're about to fight a boss. Whatever it is you want to do. So, that is an outline of what modularity can be in this kind of pipeline. But these are all hypotheticals. Again, we don't know what game we're talking about. We don't know specific details, but I can preach design like this all day. It doesn't make me a designer. I'm going to throw that out there right now. I am not a game designer. Game designers know stuff I don't know, and they deserve that credit. But I can talk game design because I understand the principles in the bite-sized pieces of modules that are going to occur. So, let's dive into Footfalls a little bit more and how modularity and thinking about breaking that stuff up is really, really powerful. I said I would include some actual tips and tricks for designing sounds and that sort of thing. Um, in the case of our adventure game where we can put on lots of different cool outfits or gear that we find, we want it to be really realistic, you know? We might have 5, 6, 7, 8 different types of shoes you can put on. Maybe your character can be anywhere on size scales, on gender scales, on anything that you want them to be. Maybe they have multiple legs, or more than 2 legs. Who knows? But they can put whatever their contact is on the ground, and it's going to make a sound. Maybe our adventure game ranges all over, has lots of different surfaces. The character might need to run in fights, but creep slowly in stealth mode, you know? All of these different permutations look like a lot. You know, I say build a footstep for every one of those things. You'll be there all day, cranking stuff out. You'll be there for months. And then somebody goes, you know, we've made our dirt wet because it's raining, so now it's all mud. Well, you're going to add another variation, and that's going to be another 90 assets you need, 100 assets you need, more, depending on how many shoes you have to deal with. If we look at that modularly, we can try and design this really, you know, isolated idea of what does dirt sound like? What does sand sound like? What does snow sound like? And try to mix that with any of the other details we want to make those codependent on, right? Maybe I care how big the character is. Maybe I care how the character's moving. You know, if they're moving really slowly, you can get that nice crunchy snow, you know, as you slowly put the foot down. If that's more important, maybe I pair those two things. In the example on the screen, I've paired the speed with each of those, the type of shoe and the surface, right? So that would mean having, you know, a dirt crouching variations 1 through 6, you know, to get randomization and make it feel a little more, feel a little less cue pulled and predictable. There's nothing worse than when your character is running along and it sounds like a music game. And I've mixed the surface types with that same, or I'm sorry, that was the surface types. I've mixed the speed with the different shoe types as well, made that those modules dependent. Because, you know, high heel has that trademark click, whereas bare feet have that kind of slappy skin sound on them. So as you can see, just breaking that up into 2 boxes cuts the number of sounds I'll need into 1/3. If we look at that a little more closely, what I was describing was that traditional design is I need a sound for every single thing that can happen. That's a lot. And it's a lot usually for the scope of a game based on the number of sound people or the sound person on a team. So any way you can try and make this faster by offloading some of this need onto designers and engineers and say, hey, let's make this expandable and smart. I can generate more content that goes further for this experience, for this interactive product. I can get further with less overhead if we, say, take this one key in this animation for the foot touching the ground and have it do a little bit more. Now, rather than it just saying, hey, I am a run footstep with a boot on dirt, it says, okay, go to the character module that knows what kind of shoe they're wearing. Cool. Tell me what kind of shoe is being worn. Okay, go to the surface detecting thing that's navigating whether I fall off the world. Tell me, what surface am I standing on? Cool. What animation am I in? I'm in the run animation. Take all that information and say, okay, now give me the dirt crunchy sound. Give me the boot run clop, you know, or the dirt run and the boot run, and put them together. Now, you've kind of procedurally assembled your design, and it allows you to kind of do more design in the box, as it were, in the engine of the game, so that you can say, okay, I'm going to stitch these things together do some clever mixing, which is always a good practice to just know more of what you're hearing in game and to test it in game to hear these sounds stitched together. You can simulate it in a DAW pretty easily, but it's never quite the same as hearing it in the world. That saves you so much time. And I was taught by a very, very skilled sound designer way early in my career that fast makes up for a lot of good. He couldn't teach me to be a good designer, but he could teach me to be fast. And modularity isn't this magic wand that fixes everything or is even the right choice for every project you're going to work on, but it can get a lot done really quickly, and sometimes that's enough. If this isn't a game about shoes and footsteps, maybe spending a lot of time there isn't the best bang for your buck. So a system like this allows you to quickly say, oh, here's 6 generally different crunchy variations of dirt. Throw them in there. As long as that system is stable, as long as that module can be trusted, that you know the module is going to end up with, hey, this dirt piece, this little dirt module, this surface module knows it's the right surface. This shoe module knows it's the right shoe. They work together with this animation as its own module, and now we have totally unique, interesting, widely varied runs. That's pretty powerful. Some pros and cons to this, like I was just describing. It's very fast. It's reusable. Again, this module, the dirt module, all it knows, or the surface module rather in this case, all it knows is a surface. If you tell it sand, it's sand. If you tell it water, it's water. But depending on how you design those sounds, those might be great for if someone drops an object. Maybe you have to drop little rocks on the ground. Maybe your gun ejects shell casings. Now you can pitch those way up or turn them way down in that instance, and you've got this great set of sweeteners for that stuff. You know, that's even just pitching them might cover different character scale. You know, maybe the characters aren't too big or too small. You're not going from, you know, little gnomes up to gigantic titans. Maybe you're just a large human or a small human. You can usually get away with a little high pass, a little low pass in the instances being used, or based on another module that says, hey, on a scale of tiny to large, where am I? That isolated piece of information can be fed in, and it solves your problems. You've just covered all of those sounds with no extra sound design needing to be done, no extra content needing to be generated, which saves you disk space. It saves you memory when all of these things get loaded. And again, they don't need to know anything about each other. They just need to get the correct information fed into them. That's abstraction. That not caring what the input is, just that it's accurate, and that you have a solution for it to kick out an output. Even if you didn't, maybe you have a default core sound. Well, the boot hit, you know, magic force field. Somebody created a barrier and they landed on top of it. We don't have a sound for that. Well, just play the boot. Now you've got this kind of weird, voidy boot sound, or maybe the boot sounds like it's on stone naturally. That's fine. Now you've got that covered. It's just already been done. So that's the power of modularity in something like a footfall system, where it's easy to have lots of variations of all of these things come up and not be able to generate that amount of content. And now it's, oh, well, we don't have time to add that kind of realism. Of course, it's not as realistic in some cases as carefully tailoring the sound of short grass versus tall grass on size 8 boots versus size 9 boots. If that's the level of game you're going with, you know, kind of a VR, really intense, you need to quickly know what your shoe size is without looking down. Okay, this may not be the system for that, but that's again when you consider what the project is going to be like and what the needs are and prioritize those things. As I mentioned before, this requires a little bit of foresight. Creating random dirt scuffles and random sand puffs is a little different than most people are used to dealing with in traditional sound design. Let's see, it's gotten darker here. Okay, it can still be seen. Sorry. it's going to be a little different than most people are used to dealing with as far as sound design is concerned. So a lot of times it's not the way, very, very pure artist designers want to work. And that's totally fine. It's where people like me get a job, is I can go in and say, okay, cool, I can handle something like an entire gunshot impact ricochet system or a music system without having to write any of the music, because the composer's off in composer land doing their thing, and I just need to tell them what pieces I need, or they just need to give me pieces and say, hey, it generally works like this, and then I get to do that. It again keeps people modular, and that's, game development teams are specialized for a reason. Each discipline has its own goals and training and expertise, knowledge they bring to the table. So letting each person exercise that strength and supporting it becomes this really collaborative environment. You get a lot more done. And again, it's modular. I don't know what that animator's doing that makes that animation look good, but I can make it sound good. All I need to know is if they ever take a frame out or add a frame to it to make it look better, so I can adjust accordingly. So thinking ahead of how a system is going to be planned is a lot more of an issue in something like games, because systems are a thing. Again, linear media, you just kind of start designing and then you come out the other end. Again, very abstract way of looking at that, but it's true. No one would deny that. The details of that's whole degrees and educations about. So I want to give one more kind of in-depth look at modularity for something in games, and then we can kind of do questions. I know we got started about 15 minutes late. So if we look at music, I mentioned before, music is another great example of a final product that is the result of lots of modular pieces doing their thing and then coming together. If I change the bass to a baritone sax, the song is going to change how it sounds, but there's still a piece occupying that layer. In games, we can look at music as kind of horizontal changes and vertical changes. And when I say that, I mean vertical, if you think of a DAW that has lots of tracks, which I actually have my DAW open. If you look at a DAW that has lots of tracks, you may have a guitar track, and you may have a bass track, and you may have a vocals track. So if you wanted to mix vertically, you could say, well, for this part, we're going to take the vocals out, and maybe the guitar. We're just going to go down to this low kind of rhythmic thing for the stealth section. This is visually vertical, so I use the phrase vertical mixing for that. Horizontal is what I described before, of having these kind of blocks as you progress sequentially through your song. We don't know what's in there. I still haven't described the type of music. I mean, I said a guitar and a bass and a vocal, but abstracted, we just know the game has music in it. So, by that same principle, we could break out what we have and have it react to different game states that the player encounters. And again, designers love game states. It's their favorite thing. It's this, okay, this is this part of the game. This is this part of the game. This part of the game has this state on top of it, along with this one that maybe you're low on resources or you're running out of time. That's just a great way to look at design. It's very effective and it's very modular. So this is something we can consider and use, take that modularity and see how can we make our work modular to match it. So if we do the same thing, oh wait, cool flowchart. All right, so I have a story about the flowchart. This is a different flowchart than the one I'm going to tell the story about, but this is game states for a mystery game that I'm pretty sure everybody has played that helps us follow through with the different pieces of music we needed. Again, this is modules in the purest sense. If we start here, we can see, okay, in our breaking down this foresight that I talk about, we can say we've got just starting out and doing our thing. The level has a timer thing going on, so we can key into that module and speed things up. We can grab like a power-up of some kind that'll play one of these two sounds, and then one of those is done. It'll either go back to the loop, back to the main loop here, or if we're going to end, we can win and play a victory sound, or lose, and then we can pick a new level. Breaking out our music like that dramatically changes asking a composer to write a song. Writing a song, give me 2 minutes of music, doesn't solve any of these problems. It just gives you something cool to put on a soundtrack. To solve these problems, the composer needs to be aware of that as well. And again, that's why thinking modularly up front can inform a lot of the decisions you make while you work. What pieces am I going to need to make the same whole? What horizontal pieces and musical pieces do I need to bring in the music, the vocals when nothing's going on, if the player stands still? There was a game called Transistor by Supergiant. It was a fantastic game that had a button that you could hold down just to sing along to the music in the game. Super interesting. Totally had nothing to do with the game. The narrative it had to do with, but the actual mechanics of the game, it didn't help you win or anything like that or pump you up. It was just cool. And that was a perfect example of vertical mixing. But you have to be able to pull that one vocal track out and play the music regularly the entire time. Again, planning for that means the composer has to keep in mind that the music works without the vocals. If you didn't figure out, it was Mario. Mario's a great example of horizontal mixing because early Mario games never did anything fancy with the music other than played the specific thing you needed to hear at the time, or speed it up was the only vertical mix. So you'd hear the speed up real fast. I'm not going to sing it. So if we approach something like that with thinking of the pieces we need, it starts to make the game really react and really cue the player with what's going on with these musical beats and emotions. If you're going to a level of you can be winning or losing, if you need to call out that an enemy is approaching, maybe they have themes, leitmotifs that are coming through. Planning ahead for, hey, enemies from this ninja clan are going to have this music come in when they approach. That's a module that people need to know about and you need to plan for, because otherwise you just have this level sounds like this place. This level sounds like this place. Battle music always sounds like this. Thinking modular, you can say, well, we know we have battles. Who are we battling with? Okay, so one thing that matters is you have an enemy. So that piece of information affects what we're doing. That's a great way to make your music interactive, and it gives you a more immersive experience from what I've encountered. Again, it complicates things. It takes more time, and it takes in-engine work. That's a lot of the trade-off of this modularity is a system needs to be built to do this. If you don't have a way of transitioning from adventure music to combat music to victory music, writing 3 different pieces of music isn't going to help you because there's no way to use them. But if you can pull it off, it's awesome. The quick story I wanted to tell, again, without naming names, I was working with an external contractor and an external sound design team, and we had a fairly simple gameplay loop, but the composer just couldn't visualize it. He wasn't quite sure what I was asking for when I said, I need a piece when you're winning, a piece when you're losing, a piece for phases 1, 2, and 3, an intro and outro, and all this sort of stuff. He didn't quite follow it. So I made this flowchart for him, not unlike this flowchart here, that had villain shows up and taunts you. Villain fights you for a little bit. Villain becomes phase 2 and does a thing. Villain becomes phase 3 and they're either ahead of you in points or behind you in points. And then it ends and they go back to the beginning. When I showed him that, he said, oh, I get it. Whipped out this really great stuff and it came together seamlessly. Fantastic composer. Loved working with him. And the audio team caught wind of it and said, hey, our composer was talking about this flowchart you made. He really liked it, but he didn't have it handy. Can you send us that flowchart? I said, yeah, sure. I sent it to him. This is incredible. Do you mind if we keep this? Sure, it's just a flowchart. And fast forward 6 months, the project is done. I get a message from the director of their department. It says, hey, everybody's talking about this flowchart, and I want to see it. Can you send me this flowchart? So from that point on, I've loved using the flowchart approach for any composers in the room, thinking about how you're going to break out the actual gameplay loop and pair music to it is, again, kind of this whole modularity in sound outlook. So, with that fun tale, and with the 10 minutes we would have left if we were 15 minutes in the past, any questions or thoughts? And hopefully I didn't leave anybody in the dust. I apologize, I can sometimes speak very quickly. So, questions are always welcome, no matter if they are something that you feel like I covered, or feel like I glossed over, or just missed. Or crisp high fives. I welcome those too. Either way, I'm really appreciative of getting to be here, and I hope that everybody learned something.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
If no one else does. I don't want to jump the line. So
I don't have a question, but I will totally give it crisp high five.
Alright. Crisp high five it is. I got them for days. But yours was special.
Alright. So, in talking about, as a composer, how does one go about preparing, as a composer or a sound designer, how does one sort of develop this mind for modular design? And in a particular game, for example, like you sit down and you talk with designers, you talk with engineers.
Great question. It's the best way is to be a fan of the game and to understand the game. And a good way to practice that is with games you really enjoy playing, because they probably have some kind of gameplay that is engaging you and compelling you and drawing you back to that game. So if you try to, again, I always say kind of squint and blur things, but if you try to break the game down into the module phases of the game, you'll start to see what things can be done. And talking with designers, if you're working on the game, is a great way to find out, okay, hey, what's our gameplay loop like? What are the things that matter at any given point to the player, or what do they want to matter to the player at any given point? Because sometimes you'll head it off at the pass. They might say, oh, well, we've been trying to figure out a way to tell the player that they're, missing a secret back there. That might be, or that the enemy has set a time bomb and it's counting down, but we don't want to hear a beeping sound if they don't care. Maybe it's not an urgent time bomb for some reason. Talking to designers is definitely a great way to figure out what's important to them, and then figuring out what of that is as important to you for the music, or what needs support. But if you look at like Hades is a phenomenal game, also Supergiant, that the gameplay loop is really, really tight. All their gameplay loops are always really, really tight. But you kind of you are in your home base, and you can run around and idle and do things there, and there's no real fighting. And then you go into each room individually, and there's kind of a start to entering the room. Maybe there's a little intro there. Then there's a fight, and then at some point you've cleared the room and the timer stops, and you can just hang out. You can just wait. You don't have to move on until you're ready. Looking at that loop could then inform what you want to do with the music. So just thinking in terms of the gameplay, and thinking in terms of, well, if you had all the time in the world and all the music in the world, how would you use these different pieces? And the more you do that is like, practice makes perfect. Is the key to that. So as a composer, looking at games that have particularly compelling soundtracks, or maybe they don't. Maybe the gameplay was phenomenal, but the soundtrack was, not stellar, or was very simple. Over designing can be great practice. You want to avoid it in in the world, but taking a game and saying, okay, how would I have put music to this? And taking some gameplay and stripping the audio out and writing music for a little sequence like that is great practice, because you already know how things are going to branch. But you know, you could take a Super Smash Brothers game and make it focused on one character and how they're doing, and now that's a really interesting composition challenge. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Brian, you had a question? Or Chris by 5?
Not any questions in particular. It's
Or comments?
yeah, I mean, just overall, like, modularity is just incredibly useful for game development in general, because no matter what your discipline is, everyone, I think, has to deal with that problem of things shifting around and, like, oh, we realize this, we need to make this change, and that change has ripple effects to every aspect of stuff. So more than the overall design of the game and each individual part of it is modular, can be shifted around to account for those kind of changes is helpful.
Yeah, well, I didn't even bring in. You can rabbit hole as deep as you want in fidelity on modules, but we didn't talk about the animation itself that I described was 4 steps in a run cycle. That could be the left foot run cycle and then the right foot run cycle, and it could be 2 different animations that are then stitched together. Is something I've seen. You know, we don't have a run, jump, leap, roll, crouch, stand up animation. We'll have 7 different animations that are individual little modules that get blended together because it's the exact same approach. And so you're absolutely right. Every discipline looks at ways to kind of make these things bite-sized and reusable and mix and matchable, and all it takes is shuffling orders around. So, yeah, I totally agree that's thinking about this as just a sound talk would be a handicap for anybody that was watching, because it's useful everywhere. Any other questions or comments? Or actuallys? I do love actuallys.
I have some questions.
All right, fire away.
Yeah. I was going to ask my original question, but before that, when I hear about the music modulation stuff, first question I have is for the music modulation, isn't it more ideal to use some kind of like a stinger to transition from one state to another? And second question I have is in terms of, as you mentioned about the animation, currently when I'm working on the animation on different material, I always have some kind of like a bass sound effect, and then I layer it with the WYs or Fmod to have different kind of material on it. Is there another way to do it?
So I'll answer your second question first because I think it's quicker. That's the way I like to do it, and with Fmod or Ys, it's very easy to do. Those are definitely the tools to use because you can just play 2 different sounds in a single event, and you can pair those off in the event, or you can play 2 events, however you want to do it. That kind of additive design is exactly what I was trying to stress in this talk. So I think you're doing it probably exactly correctly, having kind of a core layer and then a thing added on top of it. You know, how much you want to tailor that core layer to say, oh, well, on sand, I want to turn it way down because you can't really hear the shoe on there. That's up to you, but I think that's exactly the way you'd want to do it. And Wise gives a lot of tools for single object scope adjustments during events. Like, hey, for this event on this game object, turn that sound down or high pass that sound, or anything you want to do to adjust that core sound as you're going. As far as music, absolutely. Transition stingers help a lot, or transitions or stingers, whatever you want to call them. I usually call them transitions if they happen on a beat, occupy a space of time, and then the next thing picks up. And stingers if they just play over top of it. So I might be playing along, and the perfect example of both is the bass drop. So no matter what song you're playing, If it's driving along and then all of a sudden that's a perfect transition. And I taught a young composer to write those. I said, if you ever don't know what transition to give me for this or how to get from this part to this part, just write a bass drop. Just drop a bass a little bit and you're good to go. And it took him, I don't know, a dozen of those before he came to me one time. He says, I get it now. I know what you mean when you say transitions. I'll write you actual transitions. So those are very important for, again, making it seamless. But there's no reason you couldn't have music that's always at the same tempo or at tempos that blend nicely and meters that blend nicely and keys that blend nicely to just kind of cross-fade over each other. Done correctly and on the beat, that can feel just as good. Maybe the music doesn't change that dramatically. I've had a lot of success. The story I told earlier with the flowchart, we had a transition for everything. The composer actually gave me a giant list of transitions. Said, okay, if you're in this third of the song, it's in this key. You're going to use this transition. In this one tiny spot, it's in this key. You're going to use this transition. So I had to change the system to accommodate knowing where I was in this 1 minute loop or this 1.5 minute loop to say, okay, if I'm reading this, if I'm at this part of the loop, if I'm at this time stamp of the loop, use this transition, which again I did with Wise, so that I could mix and match the transitions to hit on the right beat, be at the right tempo, be in the right key. That's overkill in a lot of cases, but it sounded really cool and it worked very seamlessly. So transitions are very important. And again, they can be thought of as modules. You have song loop that just hangs out and loops until you win or lose the combat. Then you have a transition that takes you out of it, and then it goes to the results. Maybe there's 2 different transitions, one for you won the fight and one for you lost the fight. Having that module broken out of, I don't care what the transition is, I know it exists, so I have to make a bass drop as a stand-in for it, right? Placeholders are great. I make an 8-bar phrase that loops, that's my combat for now. I can make that loop longer or shorter. It's modular. As long as it's looping and sounds okay, I'm good with that. I make a bass drop. The outro is not a loop. It plays once and does, your classic da 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 victory or blah, sad trombone loss. And then it goes to whatever the gameplay loop is until you get into the next fight, or if you're in the menu or you're the score screen or what have you. And then that'll have a transition. So thinking of it abstractly in these little modules can help you create that flowchart and determine, maybe I don't need a transition. Maybe the second you die needs to be jarring. The boss can beat you at any point in the loop. Maybe that doesn't have a transition. Maybe that just maybe the end is the transition almost, right? You play this stinger, sad trombone, the music cuts right out, and it's very jarring. And that's the effect you want your audience to experience. So as many rules and stories that I tell, they're all really guidelines. Does that make sense? There's never one right answer. Yeah, absolutely. Going once? Going.
If there's no question, I have another question. Actually,
go for it. Go for it. But only if you tell me what your icon is, because I'm curious.
Oh, it's a Moore shoe. It's a meme. Some guy made a 3D model for Zelda Philips version of the game.
All right, I will check it out.
It's just joke with my friends. But another question is, in terms of workflow, you mentioned about placeholder, and do you also create a placeholder for when you try to work in the modular system?
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of using test tones, at least when I'm working kind of locally. I don't necessarily like to put them in the game for other people, because people get real tired of hearing a 1 kHz beep or 2 kilohertz beep or 400 kilohertz beep, or 400 hertz beat. They don't necessarily want to hear that every time a character takes a footstep. But depending on what tools are available, if I don't have a tool for telling me what surface I'm on, making each of those different surface containers a beep of a different frequency can tell me really quickly if the system is working. And because, again, those would sit in random containers and Ys, you could also hook up the events and build that whole system without the content before you even saw it, right? I can say, okay, well, I know I'm supposed to run across sidewalk and then grass and then some gravel. So I'm going to put in 3 different beeps, one for the sidewalk, one for the grass, and one for the gravel, along with the core shoe sound that's just any old library sample of a foot, and see if I hear boop, beep, beep, as I run across them. I can then take the beeps out or turn them down or mute them or whatever, and I know the system works. No one else will hear the difference, but I can take my time and then design that stuff. So even if the placeholder doesn't go into the game where other people can see it, it can prove out that a system works, or that the certain module is doing what you expect. And so, yeah, absolutely. Is as much as you can sanity check yourself, I say do it, because if you pull a song that you really like, you maybe you every time you're fighting, you hear the Doom music in your head because that's the feel you want for your game. Pull the Doom music and try dropping it in and seeing how it goes. Pick, whatever part of it you think you can loop and play that on loop, and then pick where the song ends, or a big, huge drum hit that has a long decay, and make that the ending of the fight. And then once that works, you can kind of mix and match the pieces anywhere else you need. Every one of your fights is implemented. You just have to actually write the music for it. Again, this is the technical designer in me talking. I love to set everything up and let somebody better than me make the content, but eventually it usually gets to me making the content anyway, which is why, again, kind of doing it in reverse like that informs how I'll design things or how I'll compose things. Because I say, oh, well, I made this car engine out of 3 pieces. I made it out of tires, I made it out of an engine sound, and I made it out of kind of the car body rattling. And I only want to pitch up the engine when I'm going uphill because it's straining, or turn it down when you're going downhill because it's at ease, rather than just making a car loop, right? If I built that system first and said, well, I wonder what I could do. I bet I could do something crazy with this. That informs my design. And if it's a game about, motorcycles, the motorcycles need to sound really engaging. We just did Tony Hawk, the remaster 1 and 2. Skateboards are the point of that game. So systems that we built to make the skateboards interesting and organic and engaging were more complex than anything we did for the characters moving around. Who cares about the skaters? It's a game about skateboarding, not skaters. It is about skaters too. We did work on them. But the point is, that's where the time was spent, and the extra detail to different wheels versus deck creaks versus whatever else.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question.
I have a really random, curious question.
I love it.
How do you get the audio source? You're talking about these motorcycles. Are you recording it? Do you get to go and hang out with motorcycles and take the audio, or are you generally using existing libraries?
It's always a combination. Usually for proving out a thing and building a system, I'll use something placeholder, which is from a library. I'll just find any old motorcycle sound to say, okay, I just need to prove that this can work. So placeholder is usually whatever the least effort is. But after that, it depends on the quality of the library that I can find. Sometimes you can find, hey, somebody did a whole study on ghosts and recorded a bunch of actual ghosts. You're going to have a hard time, tracking down as high quality recordings of those ghosts. Versus, maybe I have a cool sounding bird in my backyard. I don't know what bird that is. I'm not aware. I'm not a bird watcher. I have no clue. I can maybe try and Google it, but it's easier for me to run outside and record it with a mic. And now I have this cool sounding bird to throw into my ambient loop. So it really depends on how deep you have to go how detailed you have to be on a specific thing, whether you record it. Skateboards are a great example. There's not a lot of need for skateboards unless you're making a skateboarding game or a documentary about skateboarding. So something like that requires a lot of field recording and a lot of seeing what the boards sound like and riding them around and bending them and just stressing them to see what they do. But if you need, a vintage car, that can be a hard thing to track down. For motorcycles, I would love to go hang out with a biker gang. I'll be that weird guy. I'm unabashedly gregarious and friendly, so I'll just walk right up and, hey, I've got this mic. You guys want to be in a video game? Most bikers will tell you absolutely. And I say, I need you to rev your bike. Really? That's the thing I was going to do anyway, because I'm a bicyclist. I'm a motorcyclist. So they'll rev the engine, peel out for you, and you've got some really authentic stuff. But it really comes down to time versus budget versus need, right? Good, fast, cheap, pick two. In this case, it's just pick what you need. Does that make sense?
Cool. Yeah. Oh, it's exciting.
I will say, as just a fun design tip, thinking modularly, oftentimes one element of a sound mixed with another element of a different sound will make a better sound. That might sound reductive or, obvious, but the number of times I've taken a muffler sound or a braking machine sound from a library and added it to a recording of my car running in neutral is staggering, because I can turn my car into a weird busted van. I can turn it in with like just some pitching and some wreckage sounds, or I can turn it into a high energy spacecraft, whatever I need. I just throw some other details on top of it, and now it becomes this different beast. So thinking in terms of, well, I've got this, kind of uninteresting core sound from a library. What do I really need? Well, I really need chugs of pipes and mufflers and things. So maybe you can get some pipes and do some old cartoon puffing into the pipe, and it'll sound like a puff, 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 puff. And now you've got this fun little, steam powered helicopter machine that a person is pedaling. It's really about creating the elements that you need if you don't have something that satisfies that purpose.
That last thing you just mentioned reminded me of two different anecdotes of two other sound designers I've seen talk. One was to keep bringing up Supergiant. The sound designer from them mentioned with his talk about how he did all the sounds for Bastion, that he ended up needing like a catapult sound for something for like one of the weapons, but then ended up realizing that if he just like layered that into every impact sound of the game, every impact just sounded like weird, like whatever. So like every impact sound from any weapon in that game has a sound of a catapult mixed into it, just because like it made everything sound better.
Yep.
So a good example of just layering stuff, and then
and modular.
Yeah, and modular, and yeah, like to the modular point, I also had seen a talk from the sound designer of Gears of War, and he was just describing one weapon sound he did, and he again thought about it in that very kind of modular way of like, okay, well, the first thing that happens is like the bullet hits the dirt, so I need like the sound of like metal hitting dirt, and then it's like a laser, so I need this sound. So like he just like listed every sound that was like in this one like sound of a laser hitting a piece of dirt, and yeah, it was like a crazy number of things. I think it was like 100 sounds all mixed together to just be like the sound of this laser hitting this dirt, because he thought about it as library like, okay, well now this is like the burning sound of that laser, and then this part of the laser, just got super detailed with it.
Yeah, if you ever want to see a really crazy talk on this, look at the gun assemblies for Borderlands 3. They did something that I've always wanted to do, that every time I've wanted to do it, somebody has said there's no way, we can't maintain a system like that, we can't set up a system like that, there's no time. And they basically, depending on the length of the barrel, they processed parts of the sound, depending on whether it had a silencer procedurally. They would just look at how the gun was randomly assembled in its little pieces. What is the barrel? What is the stock? What is the handle or the grip? What is the trigger? How many barrels does it have? Does it have a silencer? Is it sawed off? and they would procedurally automate the sounds based on all of those characteristics from a pool of sounds for the given manufacturer and gun type. And you would get guns that sound like the manufacturer, but they're also different based on, oh, this is like a weird long submachine gun. Oh, it sounds different. Oh, this submachine gun has a silencer on it. Oh, this one is only burst fire. And they would change the sound based on those settings, and it's phenomenal. It was the first thing I noticed when I played it. I was a huge fan of Borderlands 1 and 2, and I always loved how much character the guns had. I mean, it's a game about guns. And I guess I had never put together how boring the sound was for the different guns for a given manufacturer, right? All the Jacobs assault rifles sounded exactly the same in Borderlands 2, even though they might be wildly different. In 3, they all sound different, and it is awesome. So definitely check it out. It's easy to find on YouTube. If you search, sound design for Borderlands 3 guns, it'll come right up. But it's modular to the core. It's pretty wild. Oh, I'm pretty dark now. I apologize. I would love to see the time lapse of the sun going down. I'm a ghost. Just looked at my own camera. Does anybody have anything else?
If there's no other question, I have another question. I'm sorry.
Keep them coming. Don't apologize.
As I'm also a sound designer, more like a contract, but for trying to be more modular, all the sound designers work on the DAW environment compared to WYs. What would be the best practice try to achieve modular sound approach in the DAW environment? Because there's a bunch of plugins and everything, and a lot of digital processing going on in the DAW, and we would usually bake that and put it in the WYs. But to avoid that, what would be the best approach to making more modular?
So again, it's a matter of I think showing how the system works so that it's digestible for sound designers, so they understand what they're making, and also making it not lose any quality for what they are making. So in the case of, say, a really complex laser firing, that's going to have a lot of moving pieces. There's nothing wrong with wanting to design all the elements of that and make a cohesive single sound for firing that thing. And it would work just fine. And getting someone to try and break those pieces out can be like pulling teeth. It can be very difficult. Trying to force that won't work, but if you can demonstrate why it should be done and how it'll make things better, usually people will get on board. So I think the first thing is having the plan. Making something modular for the sake of making it modular doesn't necessarily add anything. There has to be a reason. Hey, you have to make 500 slightly different lasers. Can we reuse part of that? Is a good sales pitch. Saying, hey, the laser can change colors. Can we take out an element or move an element to its own group, its own module, and add that element? Is a good motivator, because now you don't have to make 8 different laser color sounds, right? But it's an easy thing to make if the person can just change the pitch of one thing, and then they can never have to worry about it again. If they add 3 more colors, you change the pitch in Ys. It really depends a lot on if the designers are getting into Ys at all, or if they're kind of throwing sounds over the fence. Hey, I made this thing, here you go. Because you need to look at who gets to ask for what, if that makes sense. If you say, hey, I need trigger pulls for high-tech weapons, and I need laser blasts for high-tech weapons, and I need the digital pieces of the weapon processing as 3 separate things, you'll get 3 separate things. So all of that's kind of a roundabout way of saying breaking out what elements serve what purpose is the best way to design modularly. I had an example up here if you're still watching the stream. This is, a real basic session. A real complex session could have a bajillion tracks in this for a test that I did. So this has a whole bunch of nonsense going on. This is all just people walking around. There's like 6 soldiers walking around. So I compartmentalize this into just their movements in this one giant set of soldiers walking around. And their Foley and their gas mask, here's their guns working. So I can turn this off or render out just the guns. I can do whatever I want with all these different pieces. And that's organizing my session modularly, because tracks are very modular. There's a monster at the end, a critter, that I can isolate just it and deal with just it if I need to. So that's the kind of thing that by organizing your session that way, you can more easily say, oh, well, I know I'm going to need 30 trigger pulls. The trigger pulls are easy to break out. It doesn't quite do the compression that they want, but sitting down with another designer who's maybe a little scared of working an engine, saying, hey, I need 2 pieces of what you did. Can we try to recreate that same process in Wise and make it sound the same to your ear? And once you have their buy-in and they say, oh, okay, cool, that sounds the same to me, that achieves the aesthetic quality that I wanted, it's very easy to get more of the same from them because they know it'll work, right? So it's about building trust.
So basically, we are building the infrastructure first before we approach the sound design. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely to a degree. Definitely to a degree. It's easy. I mean, it's easy to take a sound apart after the fact. It just takes time, and it sometimes isn't as good as the initial one big block design. But the more that infrastructure is broken out and understood ahead of time, the easier it is to say, hey, we just need trigger pulls. All right, cool. I make some kind of cool high-tech trigger, or I make the old revolver trigger. And now they don't design with that in mind, or they design but then mute it and don't render that with the actual gunshot. So, yeah, it's foresight. It's thinking ahead of what do you need. Again, if it's a game where you only fire your gun if you're in a pinch and you only have 6 shots, you don't need to be too granular and detailed with that. So that might not be where you pick that fight. So again, going back to everybody is there to make a game, so everybody should care about why the game is going to be good and what the game design is about, right? And make everything serve that.
Thank you.
Yep. Well, thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. If anybody else has any questions, I'll hang out in this group for a little bit. I'm always offline because I hide myself because I'm scared. But if anybody has any questions and wants to pick my brain, always feel free to reach out. I may not get back to you right away, but I will definitely get back to you.
Thank you so much. As a reminder to everybody, we do have a social meeting next Wednesday, 7 p.m., the same channel. So feel free to drop in.
A casual meetup, not a meeting.
Oh, yeah, casual, social. It's a social meeting.